coming back in so punctually after lunch. Now that everybody is feeling comfortably fed, we're going to make you feel uncomfortable. The panel is a great assembly of people, and I just want to quickly run through what we're looking at. The nature of the problem. It's everything from fake news manipulation, which can be either human or through bots, and it can involve things like identity theft. There are targeted attacks, like starting with Stuxnet way back when, and Mt. Gox on Bitcoins. We've got attacks like Russian attacks on the US power grid, virus and malware like WannaCry and NotPetya that got so much attention. And then there's data exposure like Yahoo, Equifax, and even RSA, a company that's supposed to provide internet security, had the Secure ID attacked. So we've got lots to talk about, covering a wide spectrum. Each of the panelists is going to speak briefly to give their view of the world, and then we're going to throw it open to discussion. Angelica, since we'll bring you down from heaven.
You can't.
But on European parliamentary business, your committee in the Parliament in July approved the Cybersecurity Act, which aims to tackle some of the problems that we're looking at here. So maybe if you can tell us a bit about that. What is the act that you're working on, and how does it attempt to tackle things?
Right. So actually, I think cybersecurity is one of the most important topics. We talk a lot about the digital agenda, about how to complement the digital European market. We learned about all the attacks, about fake news, about WannaCry, which not only affected IT systems in one member state, but in more than 150 member states. Looking at the last years, we already some 5 years ago, we started to talk about a European cybersecurity strategy. Actually, 3 years ago, we passed the NIS directive, so we wanted to ensure that everyone is aware the critical infrastructure has to have another assurance level than other institutions. This was one big piece of legislation which had been passed, which is now implemented in all the member states. And the next issue we think we need to go for is the Cybersecurity Act, thereby having two main objectives. One is that we think we need to strengthen our European agency. We have ENISA, the European agency, being situated in Greece, in Athens, and in Heraklion. That's a small unit, honestly, if you compare it with activities in other member states. We think, we need also a European answer on that. We need to strengthen that agency. And apart from that, I think we also should go for certification schemes having a European coverage. So that are the two things where we had a lot of discussions and debates. And I'm really glad that in July, at the end of July, we managed also to get a very clear mandate in the committee. Next week, we will have the issue in the plenary once again. And if nothing is happening, and we had this broad majority, so I think nothing will happen, but you never know in politics. But then we can start, as of the week after, to enter into negotiations to begin the trilogues with the member states. We think Cybersecurity Act is one piece of legislation which we should deliver before the end of this term so that we have the framework done. That means we have to get it through until the end of this year.
Great, thank you. John, I was reading on the internet, your Microsoft president, Brad Smith, has been an outspoken advocate of, and I think maybe even an originator of the idea of the Digital Geneva Convention. And I found a quote of his from February that the tech sector plays a unique role as the internet's first responders, and we therefore should commit ourselves to collective action that will make the internet a safer place, affirming the role as a neutral digital Switzerland that assists customers everywhere and retains the world's trust. So maybe could you tell us a bit more about this idea?
Sure. The fundamental change that greatly increases the danger in cyber insecurity is the nation-state actors. And when we look at the two most devastating attacks over the last couple of years, WannaCry and NotPetya, they've both been attributed to nation states. And ironically, it was using code developed by the US NSA that was exploited, stolen, and then repurposed that was used by the North Koreans and the Russians for those attacks. There's a really fascinating article in the US edition of Wired this month, just came out about the NotPetya attack and how the attack was indiscriminate. It didn't have a particular target. It was intended to spread. And so it spread faster than really any virus has spread before. And the intended consequence was to cause chaos in Ukraine. But companies like Maersk, the Danish shipping company, were within just a little bit of completely losing their operations. So the unintended consequences of indiscriminate attacks are deeply threatening to civilians. When we look at international law, the law of armed conflict applies in times of armed conflict. And international humanitarian law says you can't have indiscriminate attacks against civilians in times of war. The threat is this below the threshold of armed conflict. These attacks, NotPetya and WannaCry, are not sufficiently regulated, we would say, by international law. Now, you can have a debate about it, whether international law applies there. It probably does, but not a single nation, even those who made attributions, cited international law as a basis for condemning them. So we think that there's an opportunity and a need to develop greater rules around norms of behavior for nation states below the threshold of armed conflict. We also think there's important for industry to step up. And so we've been working with several companies. I think it's about 50 companies now that have signed a tech accord where we pledge to defend each other's customers, to treat, essentially provide patches and things to all of our customers on a simultaneous basis so there's nobody thinking they can get a competitive advantage or a strategic advantage. And to work together to collectively raise the level of cyber resilience for governments and for industry. So I think we're also looking at how do we create more accountability. Now, the origins, if we think about the steps involved, nation states have historically engaged in espionage, right? And that's just part of what they do. And to do that today, people want to have vulnerabilities in software they can exploit so they can get into other government systems. Now, the problem is more and more governments now want to have cyber offensive capabilities. And so we're creating an arms market and an arms race. And so we're growing the number of countries with cyber offensive capabilities, and we're growing a dark market that potentially will be, it's going to launch, result in things like NotPetya and WannaCry. So we think there's something need to be done. We think there's an opportunity to address these by moving forward with diplomacy. We need countries to act. We need industry to act. And we need to create more accountability for the countries that do have cyber offensive capabilities against civilians.
Gabby, you are deep in research on the subject at Bundeswehr University. Bundeswehr, in the real world, follows the Geneva Convention, so we can come back to some of these issues in the virtual world. But you're looking at this on many fronts on research. How do you see things from where you operate?
I think cybersecurity, we have to think it completely different. Because if you see that an attacker can just see one vulnerability, and a defender needs to defend a whole complex system, the defender are always lost. So now in the research, we have a lot of in terms of moving target defense. So to change the asymmetry and say, okay, we will shift our crown jewels, our data around the system, and make it really hard for the attacker to know where to find something. So this is what we see a really promising point And the other point, maybe also for the other panel, I think in code, in this research institute we are building in Neubiberg, it's the point of the ecosystem. And adding something more is to have research, innovation around the whole supply chain till products. Because, you know, researchers have other KPIs that companies have. Researchers need publications, companies need revenue. To bring them together, to work together in ecosystems, also with a lot of money. Research needs money, innovation needs money, and fast, this is actually the point. And we are working on this research area, like moving target defense, like thinking cybersecurity completely different, changing the paradigm. Because so far, we are just running behind, but we have to be in front of the attacker.
Interesting. Miko, you've been looking at this for a long time. How bad is it?
Hope, hope.
Well, we are in the middle of a massive revolution. It's easy to see when you step back and look at how much technology has shaped our lives during the last decades. What's happening right now is that everything is becoming a computer. We all know this, but it's still hard to realize that this really is happening. Anything that uses electricity will be online. For all practical purposes, internet itself will disappear. In 10, 15, 20 years, nobody speaks about the internet. Nobody says that I'm going to go online. I mean, we are online all the time. It's become second nature for us. And the reason why everything goes online, especially consumer goods and consumer electronics goes online, is different than what people mostly think. Like when you go shopping for a refrigerator today, you can either buy a smart fridge or a traditional fridge. And that's the way we think about IoT. You know, IoT means a smart device which has a display and an app and all that. This is going to change. In 10 years or 15 years, when you go shopping for a fridge, you still have smart fridges and traditional fridges, but even the traditional fridges will be online. Even those will be on the internet. And they don't even tell you that those are on the internet, because they are not on the internet for you. They're not on the internet for you, the consumer, they are on the internet for the manufacturer. Because the manufacturers have all gone to a Gartner briefing where they've been told that data is the new oil. Data is the new oil. So they think, okay, how do we collect this new oil? How do we collect data? Well, let's just put all of our gear online. Right now they can't do it because it's too expensive to add IoT functionality into cheap consumer goods. But because of Moore's law, in 10, 15 years, it's going to cost cents to put a fridge online. So eventually everything will be online. And this is the big shift that affects computer security. I'm a computer security guy. I've been doing computer security all my life. I used to think that my job is to secure computers. And it's not. Because today everything is being run by computers, and this is just accelerating. I mean, the lights are on in this building thanks to computers. We had the lunch thanks to computers in food processing plants. Water is coming out of the tap thanks to computers. So when you work in computer security, you don't actually secure computers. What you're doing is that you're securing the whole society. And that's a pretty big responsibility to be put on a bunch of geeks and nerds.
Okay. That's comforting. Well, let's come back to securing it. Angelika, ENISA, you want to make it stronger. I think it's fair to say it hasn't become a household name in cybersecurity. It's not considered the go-to operation. Can it be made a more substantial, formidable, respected organization?
Well, in any case, I think that can happen, not from today until tomorrow. Right now, ENISA is a child, yeah, but I think it's our task, and you as politicians, to make sure that ENISA will, at the end of the day, an adult and will be someone who plays a role in cybersecurity. So that is what at least Parliament's position is right now. We have in Europe a situation that, as regards cybersecurity authorities, we have quite a lot of countries who have very prominent, very effective cybersecurity agencies, but we have a lot of other countries who have nearly nothing. And as I learned, you know, well, ecosystem, everyone can attack everything. being right now still on the online, but being connected like it is. I think we need more cooperation, more information exchange. Well, otherwise, but that's good to hear from the other participants on the panel, we will simply not manage to defend our cybersecurity. And for that, I think we need this strong ENISA. Our proposal sets out that we need more money, and then that we need more people in ENISA. And we start slowly with arranging for more joint cooperation and building up the units in all member states, in particular in the member states which have so far no cybersecurity units. And well, I think that's the job we have to do, honestly.
John, the Digital Geneva Convention's a very high-minded idea, but maybe can you talk a bit more about the reality of what Microsoft and your peers are doing day to day?
Sure. We now invest $1 billion a year in cybersecurity. The transition to cloud computing means that customers, our enterprise customers, are shifting their workloads into our data centers, and so we have to protect their data as our first priority. So we're spending a lot of research and development applying artificial intelligence on how do you look for and defeat attempts to attack. We've had to become we're not a Miko's company is very focused on F-Secure with security. We're a secure company, not a security company. But working closely with security companies and others, we need to figure out how to change the paradigms on these things. And so, I think that through the Tech Accord, for example, looking at, not just at our products or our particular points, but how do we think about strengthening the ecosystem? Working with ISPs and enterprise customers are the things that we can collectively do that none of us could do by ourselves. So I think there's a great deal of opportunity there to rise above our individual companies and try to make the ecosystem even stronger.
Gabby, you're part of that ecosystem too, right? I mean, can you talk a bit about how your institute relates to industry and to other governments and how it all fits together?
The ecosystem is always research with startups, with great companies. So we have a lot of cooperation. We have a big lab infrastructure to share, to give also other possibilities to use this infrastructure. But I would point one point of this ecosystem is trust. So we actually have to trust people that working together and exchange also security relevant issues like threat intelligence for Europe, what we now propose, or something like this. And that's, I think, the most important issue, talking in terms of cooperation. And the second one, certainly, if you build such ecosystems, and they need to be European-based and grow and be big, to be in competition to either US or China, then it's necessary to be really European, homegrown, something like this, of course, with relation with others. But if you see what do we have in Europe, for example, on one side, let's say Amazon, Google, or Facebook, on the other side, Baidu, Tencent, and Alibaba, and in Europe, it's a question mark. Then we have to see, well, these are just 3 examples. Maybe we need to see something more digital sovereignty, to build something more also in Europe. And in Europe, we have brand. We have excellent research. We have excellent universities. But the outcome, to see startups, industry, what's coming up, it's not as expected. So I think we need to push this more also in these research programs, which is doing now with the new Horizon 2020 calls, that to be more also on the output, to be more commercial products, services, digitalization, to invest in this.
So Miko, the research, the government efforts, the industry cooperation, is it making a difference? All the the geeks?
It is quite surprising. I mean, your comments about Europe and the lack of real success stories coming out of Europe is surprising. Like, where are the big web brands of Europe? Web was invented here. Web was invented in Europe. Then when you look at your browser history, all the social media sites, all the search engines, all the cloud providers are American companies. And when we do have the rare European success stories, like Spotify or Skype or Supercell, then they're typically sold to somewhere outside of Europe before they really get a chance to make a real impact. And that is, it's kind of sad. It's something we should be able to prevent from happening, and we should be able to keep the clever young people who are setting up new technology startups here in Europe, instead of, for the first thing they do is that they move to Silicon Valley and do their startup over there. So when you, and this affects security quite directly. When you look at security companies, there's quite a few European countries which have very little local expertise or very few local security companies, which means you are relying on foreign companies for your security, which is especially important when we speak about governmental organizations that need protection. Like if you are worried about Chinese intelligence, you might not want to run Chinese security software. If you're worried about Russian intelligence, you might not want to run Russian. If you're worried about American, you might not American security software. And the choices beyond those are very few.
Maybe just to add, I think the point is, we talked in the beginning, in the morning today, speed. So also speed in terms of research, money, and innovation. So for example, the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Interior in Germany, they announced to make something like DARPA, like Agency for Cybersecurity, with substantial funding and really short times to apply for funding, and also if something is not working, to fail, to allow it, and to say, okay, it's not working, let's do it in other ways. And I think this is the necessary catalysator. We need to speed up innovation and to speed up here in Europe.
At least on the periphery of Europe, there's great brain power on the criminal side. So is there the brain power to tackle cybersecurity in Europe, and is it just not being harnessed properly? It's for whoever wants to take that.
We need a lot more people studying security. The demand for security people is through the roof, and governments want them, private industry wants them, everybody. So there's a huge opportunity if you know, somebody will look for in the next career, start doing online courses in cybersecurity.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point about like cloud services such as Azure and Azure's competitors. There's not enough security people for every single company. So in many ways, when companies move their infrastructure from their own premises into cloud computing services and cloud storage services, they actually also, in many cases, get better security. Because companies like Microsoft or Google or Amazon, they hire, you know, massive amount of security people. They are very, very serious about their security operations for the cloud services. And for most companies, they get better security hosting their computing services and storage in a cloud service than running it themselves. There might be privacy issues, but security is clearly better.
And Angelika, part of your effort is on certification of, I think, devices, but one of the questions I've wondered is almost like a meta question of who's ensuring the security of the security services. So if a company like RSA that is supposed to be ensuring security, or Equifax, which is, you know, dealing with some of these issues, is getting hacked and attacked, you know, how do we know the certainty of any of this? So what are you trying to do with the Cybersecurity Act, and you know, then I'll be interested in any thoughts on that.
Right. Well, we cannot solve all problems with the Cybersecurity Act, honestly. It's just one piece in the whole story. And what we've done is that we think it's a good idea to go for certification schemes, not only on a national scale, but also on the European-wide scale. That is our proposal right now. What we in Parliament heavily discussed or intensively discussed was the issue of how to also engage engage users, engage the society, engage the people, also to get some sort of awareness as regards cybersecurity. And for that, we have now introduced in our proposals that all IT devices, everything connected with the internet, has to submit product information as well, so that for the consumers, it is clear, do I have a device which is of high security standard or of low security standard? Are there updates available in case you get a bug, things like that? So that's what we are going to propose, and it's, I think, and I would like to learn from you, is it a good idea? I think we should also take people on board to get a feeling that, not everything is safe and secure, and everyone is also in a position to arrange for more cybersecurity when installing all the updates which had been available, which had been made available by industry. And the other issue where we had a long debate was, and that was also addressed on the panel right here quite often, is the cooperation among the different stakeholders. And that also refers to your first question, actually. We think when establishing cybersecurity certification schemes, we need industry on board, honestly. So we tried to arrange a setting for a close cooperation. Politicians do not want that industry is telling them, or public state authorities are not, do not like that industry is telling them what they should do. But as regards the cybersecurity certification schemes, I think we can't make it without industry, and for that, we have established ad hoc committees and a stakeholder advisory group and this and that. So where also a research and science institution should play a role, that we have this close cooperation amongst all stakeholders involved on the European Union level.
Maybe just a comment.
Yeah.
We all agree that our future is digital. We all agree that we will have something like 15 billion connected devices, everything will be connected. And we will not see, as Miko said it perfectly, the IT anymore, the computer and something like this. But the point is, without privacy by design, security by design, security by default, these three rules, we will create an unsecure digital society. So it's the point also to say, with developing products, this is also for the industry, that security is developed, security by design. Yeah. And if we are so dependent on the IT and the digital society, and this is our future, then I think these three rules had to be followed. Currently, they're not. We have so many IoT devices, nothing is more or less secure, and used, for example, for attacks like DDoS, distributed denial of attack, where we said already, oh gosh, old stuff. Now it's coming back much more effective because through the IoT stuff. So I think the industry has to do it. Yeah. Maybe legislation has to do it, to say, and I think also security is nothing like to say just a blocker. And to say, oh, security, yes, we have to think of this as well. But this is also incentive as a product, as a market made in Europe, to say we are here, something like secure in the digital world. And I think we have to think it also from this perspective new.
Yeah. And can I just jump in? When the Commission and NISA started talking about a certification scheme, there was some skepticism from some of our cyber people. It's like, well, what is this? But actually, we had some very good dialogues, and I think the regime that you put together I think it can work very well. I think it's calibrated in a way that will help everybody, and and we do have to. Most cyber attacks are not very sophisticated. They're clicking on an email link or an attachment and exploiting a vulnerability that's already been patched, but you haven't updated your system. So we can go a long ways by cyber hygiene, but we need to have devices that can remain secure for their life cycle.
Any questions from the audience? I see not so many people on their devices. I hope it's because the conversation's interesting and not because you're afraid. Any questions from you all? Do we have a microphone?
Gabi, I have a simple question. If we talk to general 3 and 4 stars, they always say we are under heavy attack, and it's not securing, it's counter-attacking. And they do counter-attacking. I don't know what I can speak about, but could you share something, what counter-attacking today, public available information means in defense?
Well, the point is, if you are under attack, for example, like a strong DDoS attack, and you see that your system is failing, what are you doing? You can try to reroute the traffic to some nice part, but in sometimes, it has to be an active defense. This means that you try to really block the traffic or to do some other countermeasures. The problem here is, of course, because the attribution. You don't know who is the attacker in the digital world. It's very difficult. Well, I would not say it's not possible, but it's highly difficult and highly sophisticated to identify who is really the attacker. So, and therefore it's so difficult. But of course, we are seeing an immense increase, not just quantity, but quality of attacks. Therefore, we have to make several other changes, like, for example, moving target defense, invest something new in the defense area, so that we are not always behind the attacker to see what's he doing next, but actually to turn it around to say, the attacker has a problem, to see what we are doing in the defense, and so moving our crown jewels around. And this is quite a lot of doing there. And of course, education, we said about, for example, specialists. We are doing in Europe with European Institute of Technology. I don't know if everybody knows what this is. It's something like, also known as like an ESA, but it's for education in Europe. And the point is, everybody needs specialists, everybody has a talent war. Why not pooling and sharing? Why not doing this coordinated area in Europe? And so we are now in a project where we will do it, like certificates, like MicroMasters, like MOOCs, everything online to see this pooling and sharing and to increase the knowledge of cybersecurity in Europe.
I hope pooling and sharing works better in cyber defense than it does with Europe's physical defense. We have another
depends.
Over here, and then one over there.
Thanks, Dan. Lucas Ilves from the Lisbon Council. You kind of asked my question for me already, which is, I mean, we heard the word sovereignty thrown around here, but sovereignty isn't just a question of Europe vis-a-vis the world, it's also a question of Europe vis-a-vis its member states. And my own experience, which is a few years old now, being a cybersecurity practitioner for government, is that that's a sore spot. Governments don't really feel very comfortable opening up secrets in what is kind of a crown jewel of national security. Does anyone on the panel see that getting better? Or have any prescriptions for how to make it a little bit better, or are things just as bad as they've always been when it comes to sort of actually working together in joint capabilities?
Angelika?
Well,
Mika?
I will answer when we have finished our trilogues, because exactly that will be the main topic in our discussions and debates. Yeah. And honestly, when we started our discussions in Parliament, from the national authorities all over, not only from my own country, I got the information, this is, well, doing it on the European Union level, this does not make any sense, so better not going forward and supporting the Cybersecurity Act. I think we have to go slowly, step by step, but I can reassure you that, you know, European Parliament is very strong, yeah, in moving forward, yeah. Not meaning that, you know, we need the strong European cybersecurity authorities in the member states. Yeah. BSI in my home country has more than 800 people. I do not know how many people are working in in Microsoft, you know, for cybersecurity. You mentioned $1 billion you're spending every year for cybersecurity. So, well, I do not want to compare, but BSI has 800 people, experts. ENISA right now has 120, if I calculate it very progressively. And well, this is for the time being. It's not to compare here. Yeah? But I think our job now is looking ahead, looking forward. I want the strong European. I want the strong national agencies on cybersecurity. But I think it's also necessary to build up, you know, this common approach in Europe, and that is where Parliament is very strong. There will be a lot of It will not be easy in the discussions and debates during our trilogue meetings, but I'm confident for us. It's priority number one that we move forward on that issue, and so I hope we'll get some sort of more flexibility on that.
Mika?
We should expect and insist on cooperation between governments and authorities and law enforcement when it comes to fighting cybercrime. However, we should not expect any cooperation between governments when it comes to targeted attacks, because governments do it themselves. Like most European countries develop capabilities for doing offensive attacks for purposes of intelligence gathering and spying, and also for crises and wartime. And it makes a lot of sense for governments and for militaries to invest in offensive use of cyber weapons. These weapons work, they are effective, they are affordable, and they are deniable. There's very few weapons out there which are deniable. Cyber weapons are deniable. North Korea is denying that they were behind WannaCry. Russia is denying that they were behind NotPetya. USA and Israel are denying that they were behind Stuxnet. We all know they were behind this. We just can't prove it.
Clark, and then Andreas here.
Just a quick one, actually, to follow up on the first question regarding counterattacks, because earlier this year there was a fascinating article in the New Yorker about a team of independent consultants who were trying to fight back, but found themselves in a legal gray zone because it's illegal to fight back. And they were working to get support in the US Congress to try and come up with some sort of tools to say, look, I know I'm under attack, I know who's doing it, but the moment I take a move to fight back, I'm being illegal. How does that look in, perhaps, John, your perspective, if things have changed in Washington, but also, Frau Niebler, what's going on in the EU? Is there any kind of movement to legalize some form of collective or individual counterattack or fighting back, or do you just have to take it still?
Digital stand your ground.
Yes, exactly.
I think it's hugely dangerous for society to start thinking about escalations through cyber means, just because there are unintended consequences. I don't think the Russians intended to bring down Maersk, right? But that was a side casualty of their attack in the Ukraine, and with nation states, we don't have enough diplomatic experience on how do you respond and counter-respond solely in the cyber domain. And so I think that the European Union and the United States have developed, we need full diplomatic sets of responses to cyber incidents. And so I think that I think that's a much better approach than trying to say, I got shot at in the dark, so I'm going to start shooting back.
Yeah. And from the European perspective, we are not discussing that right now in the Parliament, but I think this is an issue which has to be addressed in ESA, with the stakeholders, with all national cybersecurity authorities. I think that's rightly the point, or the place where they have to discuss about it. And if there is any need, for legal action, or for a legal framework, then I'm sure we in Parliament, we are open, and I'm looking to Mr. Kallis here. Commission will be open, to take up if there is a need to get some sort of framework or guidance or guidelines or whatever. I'm pretty sure if there is a need, we will come forward with it.
Thanks. Another question? I think it'll be our last one.
You talked about Industry 4.0 and refrigerators being connected to the internet, and now we hear about cybercrime and all the risks related thereto. Is it imaginable from your side that we come back to disconnected, decentralized structures, in particular in certain areas, infrastructure areas like energy, etc., because we feel that we are always a step behind the development in cybercrime?
Being disconnected from public networks works when you're trying to defend your networks. It's just surprisingly hard to do, and it's getting harder to do every moment. For example, in the future, when all these even stupid fridges are online, there's nothing as a consumer that you could do to prevent them from going online. There's no route you could control that they use. They will not be using your Wi-Fi to connect to the internet. They will be using 5G. They will be using LTE-M. They will be using Zigbee 3. They will be using technologies that are out of your hands. And I think a great example on how hard it is to keep systems like factories disconnected from public networks is that we regularly find factory control panels from the public internet with no authentication. And when we call these places like power plants and tell them that, you know, we found your control panels from the public internet, the response is always that no, they're not on the internet. They're like, yes, we use those systems, but they are in our private network, they are not publicly accessible. I always tell them, like, I can just press these buttons and you'll see if something changes, and they're like, no. And the story is always the same. They were private, they were in an internal network, but then someone added a remote connection somewhere, someone added a VPN link, someone added a modem to be able to do remote work. And what internet does is that it routes. If there's a connection from the internal network to the public network, internet will find a way. And this is why it's hard to do. And my final example on how it's hard to keep things disconnected, once again, Stuxnet. Iranians have massive amount of technology, massive amount of brain power, big universities. They knew that the enrichment plants they were running was a prime target for both US and Israel intelligence agencies, and they put the best resources they had to defend them. They were completely disconnected, and they were still completely hacked. It's hard to defend, even by trying to disconnect your systems.
In another context, we're seeing a return to paper ballots until people can have more secure voting systems. I think that's kind of an analogy of moving things offline until you get them more secure.
Our time, unfortunately, or for those who want to sleep tonight, fortunately, is up. I'd like to thank our panelists, all of them, for giving us something to worry about. I'm going to go home and run virus scan on my refrigerator.
Good idea.
And thank you, everyone. Thanks for the great questions from the audience. And thanks to the panelists.